Howdy guys, Jimmy Song here. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Tech Talk Q&A. This is a show every week where I go through the newsletter and all the different things that have happened in the past week in Bitcoin. This newsletter goes out every Monday morning. You can subscribe to it at jimmysong.substack.com. That below. Anyway, got a lot of things that happened this past week. In particular, I'm going to talk about LSAT, which in of itself is really. Let's get to some of the stuff that we've been thinking about. But before I do that, let's go down and look at some of the stuff that I have available on Amazon. You can go look at the Little Bitcoin book, Why Bitcoin Matters for Your Freedom, Finances, and Future. It's available in audiobook. There's also the little programming Bitcoin, learning how to program Bitcoin from scratch. So you can do that. So both of those are available on Amazon. If you have things, if you're running out of things to read at home because you're stuck. Anyway, this week's edition is on LSAT. And that would be the long read today. But one of the things that really makes me excited about this technology is the fact that right now, all over the internet, everything is essentially paid for by ads. The reason why Google serves you good search results is because they can sell you ads as compensation. If they were just giving it away for free without having any sort of revenue stream, it wouldn't work. Similar things with Facebook, similar thing with YouTube. Almost anywhere that you go, unless you're paying for it, generally most people are not. If it's free, there has to be some ads involved. And the reason why they have to have that is because they can't charge you directly. If Google charged you a fraction of a penny for a search result, but you don't get ads, that would be great, except there's no easy way to do that, right? Like to do a fraction of a penny search. And the mental cost of calculating that becomes very different. This is where I think Lightning has a real shot at changing some of the stuff, because ads are more or less ubiquitous on, and they're not just really annoying, but oftentimes they're very intrusive, and track things and try to do things in kind of unethical ways. I used to work in that industry, so I know some of the bad things that can happen. So to me, when we're talking about LSATs or paying for API calls, it's at the heart of what Lightning enables. It enables kinds of certain kinds of transactions that couldn't happen, and this is what LSATs is about. Now, if you haven't read the blog post, essentially this is from Lightning Labs, and what they're doing is they are releasing Lightning service authentication, and basically the mic is a bit skipped. Sorry about that. Let me try to lower the threshold so that it's a little bit better. Okay, all right. Hopefully that's a little bit better. All right, so what LSAT does is it makes it so that instead you can pay for viewing a web page or something like that. This is supposed to be sort of like a way to have machine-based sort of transactions. You can feed your you can set up a Lightning node and basically have it pay for web views that are under a certain amount, something like that. Or you can, go and get do API calls to find out like what what the weather is like today outside in Italy or something like that. You can get a lot better data that you could pay for instead of just trying to scrape it off the web and so on. And it's in a format that you might like. But that's the idea. It's a really cool use case, and it really is native to the web. It's kind of ironic because 21, the company that Balaji uh, started a while back. This was kind of their original thing, but for them it was kind of centralized. This one is much more decentralized, so it feels like it's going to be a lot more successful because there's no permission needed and there's no need for a company in the middle to make money. It's just between users, and you don't have to shave fractions of a penny in order to make money. Anyway, we'll talk about some of the possible use cases, but we'll do that more in the long read later. Now, if you're Jameson Lopp wrote this really interesting article on testnet and what the heck has happened and so on. Basically, it's a deep dive into why the testnet network has so many blocks and why it it does what it does, and why it's kind of why people have been able to do some interesting things on it. Essentially, testnet has way more than 1 million blocks, and the like mainnet is approaching 630,000, which is the halvening. So clearly, the mainnet is testnet is going a lot faster. So he dug into what's going on, and at the time of writing, there were 1.7 million blocks. And 99 of those, and there's 840 difficulty retargets, and most of them reset to 1. And this is due to the testnet rule that Gavin Andreessen added, which was, if nothing is found in 20 minutes, then difficulty can go down to 1, so that we at least have a block and don't have to wait for 1, and and stuff like that. This unfortunately had some consequences, because the difficulty adjustment algorithm on a 2-week scale uses the last block to figure out what the next difficulty should be. So oftentimes it's very, very low. And there's like reorgs of like over 1,000 blocks that happen as a result. And this can kind of cause a little bit of chaos if you're doing anything on testnet. And that's what this whole post is about and why it is. And he looks at some C++ code, what's going on, why you have to wait. Very good article. If you're using testnet at all, it's a good way to find out like why it behaves the way it does. There are solutions coming, like Signet is already out already. You can also use reg test. You could use testnet in a box. There's a lot of different ways. All right, here's another interesting paper. This one is from Ruben Samson, who has written about a perpetual one-way peg. And essentially, this is kind of like sidechains, except you're going only in one direction. So sidechains are two-way pegs. So you have 1 Bitcoin going to the sidechain, you can get 1 Bitcoin back for the same amount, and that's what makes it a sidechain. With Ruben's idea, it's only one direction. Essentially, you're going from Bitcoin to this other chain. So it's kind of like what Counterparty did with their proof of MERN, but it's done on a continual rolling basis. And that in itself is interesting. And his main argument for doing it this way is so that there's no new token created, that no one is trying to print their own money, and that people instead are doing it for the tech. Now, I suspect that most people don't want to do anything with the tech. The reason why they create altcoins and ICOs and all this stuff is to make money. And if they didn't, if the money wasn't there, then they probably wouldn't do it. And the business model around sort of a one-way peg sidechain would be very different, because essentially you have to rely on services, or if you're, I guess, a merge miner, then you can get fees out of it or something like that. But like there's very little money to be made, unlike ICOs and altcoins, which make it very easy to make money. You can be king of the hill and first one in for that sort of thing. So it's an interesting idea. And especially with the blind merge mining, that if you do it in that way without the peg back, blind merge mining has no security implications really. So you don't have to check the other chain and so on. All right, so that is the 21 million Bitcoins. All right. Yeah, so I would love to see some sort of decentralized identity with the public key infrastructure on a P1WP sidechain. So I think Microsoft, at least I was told that they're working on something on top of Bitcoin, but it's like a side tree. You could do it kind of as a perpetual one-way peg as well, and put all your put public keys onto that chain and have it be decentralized as a result of the blind merge mining and so on. That would be interesting, and you wouldn't have to rely on like PGP servers and things like that. You just you can run your own like sidechain node that has all of the public key info already that's been merge mined on Bitcoin, and you can check on and so on. So I think there are some pretty interesting potential use cases there. All right, Bitsy Academy has a nice intro to Taproot. Now, I've gone over that multiple times on this show, but if you want something to show people that don't really know what Taproot is yet, and want to give them an idea of what benefits there are, this is a nice short article that'll give you at least a nice solid grounding in what Taproot can do. The main example that they bring up is fairly trivial, but it's kind of like, hey, this person wants to do. Bob doesn't, like, you want Bob to be able to unlock his stuff before he turns 18 and so on, and you don't want him to know what conditions it can get unlocked. So it's kind of an interesting idea. And the example sort of crystallizes it a little bit. All right, Bitfinex has expanded the capacity of Lightning Bitcoin withdrawals, and this was in an announcement that they made this past week. And they're one of the few actual places that takes Lightning deposits. So it's instant. It used to be limited to 0.04 Bitcoin. Now it's all the way up to 0.5, and the payment out at least that you can receive, and you can have payment channels up to 2 Bitcoin. So it's kind of nice that you can do that. More companies using, or more exchanges using Lightning Network would make that much easier, because then you can just like transfer them back and forth. The other competitor to this is more or less Liquid, and the capacity there is fairly increasing, and you can use Liquid Bitcoin to transfer between exchanges, which seems a little more suited to what traders do. But this is also a welcome development. It means that they at least trust the Lightning tech to handle half a Bitcoin, in withdrawals and so on. Lightning Labs, besides their LSAT announcement, they had an announcement for Faraday, and Faraday is a way to basically, if you're a router, if you're a Lightning node, and you have certain underperforming channels, you can close them out so you can use that capacity for somebody else. Basically, if you're a routing node, you have to be keeping track of all of the other all the channels that you have, and because you're locking up Bitcoin in those channels, closing out ones that are not getting really used is a good idea, because you only have a fixed amount of Bitcoin, and you can only have the capacity in payment channels equivalent to the amount that you're backing it. So that sort of thing, that sort of management is very important, and that's what Faraday allows you to do, is to manage all of those channels in some reasonable way with good statistics and so on. All right. Verifi has written a summary of why fiat money is the virus. So this is a fairly long article, but well worth reading. It's talking about Bitcoiners' expectations. How do we expect Bitcoin to really get adopted? But the argument is basically fiat money causes a lot of different it's a very long article, by the way, but it's very very useful. It goes through the Bretton Woods Agreement, it goes through the U.S. dollar and how it's used, and basically all of the money printing that's going on, and why Bitcoin is the alternative, and why people are turning to it. We used to think that like people would study Bitcoin and then get to know it and then be convinced of its arguments. It seems like the argument made in this article is more correct, which is that we're going to see a lot more people just come in because they have to. They have no alternative, and that may very well be the way in which hyper Bitcoinization happens. BitMEX Research has an excellent article. It looks like I didn't link it, so let's go find it. BitMEX Research. So they had a really nice article. Yeah. So this is it. Let me go update this thing so you guys can get at it. And this is how you edit the posts. There it is. How did I not link the article? Seems rather silly of me. Update on website now. There we go. All right, so we're gonna go take a look at the article from BitMEX Research and what happened in March of 2020 and what happened to exchanges and so on. According to them, basically on March 13th when Bitcoin crashed, like highest daily volumes pretty much across the board, and we'll see in the Coinbase story that was the case there too. But volumes just went insane. Derivative volume went insane as well. Institutional volume, institutional derivative volumes plummeted, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of a crazy day, and there's a lot more interest in Bitcoin as a result. And as we saw in the last article, it looks like people are just sort of coming into Bitcoin because they have no other choice. There's no alternative really. And that's there's a lot of really good statistics about like the derivative volumes and how much of it was based on derivatives and so on. It does seem like like a lot of liquidations led to the crash and so on. But essentially the BitMEX article is fairly bullish. It means that a lot more people are coming in to Bitcoin. And similar sort of article from Coinbase talking about what happened on March 12th. There was a 50% decline, but at the same time, there were so many people coming in, and and all of the there were 5 times increase in cash and crypto deposits, twice increase in new users sign up, 3 times increase in trading users, 6 times increase in total traded volume. It was just an insane day, and I've heard this from many exchanges that like that day was probably the most profitable day that they've ever had, and so on. So based on that, it does seem like a lot more people are coming into Bitcoin. And despite the current narrative that Bitcoin is actually more correlated with all the other assets, at least interest in Bitcoin tends to be counter-cyclical to recessions and so on, at least at this very moment. This site was something that people pointed out to me, but basically it's a good idea of where Bitcoin is at a premium and where it's at a discount. And you can see, sort of the values of each value at each exchange. So, this one is South Korea. It's based on Coin One. I'm not sure if they're open. I'm guessing they are, but who knows? You can see, for example, Nigeria has a giant premium. But this is based on sort of like the exchange rate of the Naira versus the US dollar, and who knows how liquid that is. Czech Republic seems to be, have a slight discount over here. Other places with a big premium, Argentina has a 7% premium. But yeah, it's a nice map, and it gives you an idea of what's going on sort of from a global perspective, and you can identify where the distressed places in the world kind of are, or where the arbitrage opportunities are anyway. Yeah, despite all of this unprecedented volume across exchanges and stuff, it's interesting that Bitcoin.com laid off half its staff. So basically, Bitcoin.com is Roger Ver's company, and they had like 150 employees. They laid off half their staff. Now, perhaps it's because of coronavirus or whatever, but the fact that they're laying all of them off, and the halvening is happening in a couple days on BCH. And what's going on, right? They run an exchange, mining pools, all sorts of things. What that tells me is that they're losing money on all of these endeavors. Roger spent tons of money on conferences, exchanges, merchant adoption, funding developers, and doing all sorts of things. The fact of the matter is, none of that's really been profitable for him. Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision, both of those combined represent about $400 worth of value per per BCH back in like August 2017. That's less than the $500 that it was trading for right before the split. So that tells you that they've basically thrown the money down a hole, and they've been subsidizing this coin for quite a bit, and they're finally starting to feel it because they've had to lay off half their staff. Bitmain has more or less done the same thing. They were heavily subsidizing BCH, and they're not doing so well either, and they've had to cut back. They had layoffs a while back. But you can't just throw money down a black hole like BCH and expect to survive. They thought that they could make the money back by marketing it and getting more users. They've been wrong. It's been 2.5 years. They really don't have that many users, and they continue to sort of flounder price-wise, which is a decent indicator of how much people are willing to hold it. And who knows how much Bitmain and Bitcoin.com and Roger Ver have, but I would bet that they own a very large chunk of it, and that's the only reason why it's not dropping even further. All right, I did do a podcast on Crush to the Street, and I did two podcasts last week. I did 2 shows on this channel. All right, let's take a look at Twitter, and I will talk about some of my tweets. Hopefully they weren't too controversial this week. All right, let's see here. All right, at what point do you come out of lockdown? Most people seem to have said that they want to get out right now, among like the 100 or so comments. And I also asked for predictions, or I set some predictions that the service industry will have overcapacity, lots of sales, contests, sweeps, and the government will campaign to get people to spend. Assets will first dip, then go absorb all the new money being printed. Those are my predictions, and that's just based on like sort of the economics of what the Fed is doing. It does feel like the assets will absorb a lot of it. How much Bitcoin absorbs is still up for debate, but that will be interesting as well. The other question I asked is, how will we remember this lockdown 20 years from now? Which event in the past in terms of impact will the current crisis be remembered as closest? Most people said Spanish flu, which surprised me because Spanish flu literally killed like some significant percentage of the population. I mean, we're not even in like basis points yet in terms of how many people coronavirus has killed, but that seems to be what people are thinking, at least on my Twitter feed. My hope after this crisis is that more people recognize central bank monetary policy for the evil that it is. It's never neutral. It favors one group over another and causes huge societal problems. Once they recognize that, it's a short step out to opt out with Bitcoin. And And this really is my hope. And I think more people are realizing because there's a lot of people coming into Bitcoin right now. And you can kind of see it in the price. I think it's trading at around 7,200 at the moment that I'm speaking. And, that's up from 3,800 of the low back in March 13th. So there's a lot more people coming in. The April 1st joke of toilet paper token is hilarious. It's out of stock. It was out of stock. I am noticing though that there's a lot more toilet paper at grocery stores. The interesting thing is there's only one type of toilet paper per manufacturer because they're going. There's sort of switching costs whenever the factory switches to like a different type of toilet paper. So they're just, in order to produce as much toilet paper as possible, they just produce the same type over and over again. What else is interesting is that they only have the highest or the most costly toilet paper roll that they're producing. So they're not stupid. They realize that this is a time to make a lot of money. So instead of sort of having the lower quality toilet paper, they only have the high quality toilet paper, and that's the only thing that you can get, and only in one size. So that way they're economizing all over the place on their end to make as much profit as possible because they know that essentially everyone is going to not need toilet paper once this panic sort of passes. Jeffrey Tucker Facts, advisor to Factum, which hasn't done squat since their ICO 6 years ago, not a programmer or computer scientist, BCH fanboy. His tweet was, I'm not unimpressed by a 6,000 price of BTC. I was blown away when the thing reached $30. But can you imagine the price today if the thing had properly scaled? As if he knew what proper meant. So, I mean, that's what I was saying. He doesn't know what scaling properly means. And he's an economist. And no one should be taking his advice if Factum has anything to say about it. Like, the fact that Factum hasn't done jack in 6 years tells me that his advice isn't worth anything. And that he's not a computer scientist or a programmer, and he's been in the BCH camp. So to me, his tweet is ridiculous and it's stupid, and he shouldn't be. He's been proven wrong over and over again. So there's. I think if you look at this, there's a subtweet from his tweet in 2017. I'm thinking that the critics of BCH are not looking good. Sure, yeah. So this is what I mean by. Him not being very credible. During times of war, the general tendency of everyone is to linearly extrapolate their situation to the future, despite things changing quite often. The current crisis seems similar to me, despite dire warnings. Toilet paper will come back and people will be shaking hands again. Now, some people are saying, well, we're going to, never get into crowds again, and we're not going to shake hands or hug each other or anything like that. I think those people are just sort of projecting their current mental state to the future in a linear way, and that's always dangerous. Things will change. Now, you might think that your mentality will stay the same for a very long time, and for a few people, I'm sure it will. But for the rest of society, I think vast majority of people, it's not going to be like that, right? People will have moved on from the crisis, and then they'll start shaking hands and whatever. So basically, this tweet, the Fed is providing liquidity to foreign central banks with a repo program. The Fed is loaning out USD for treasuries, so the FCBs don't sell. This reduces the sell pressure on treasuries, keeping yields low. FCBs can now go burr. So basically, foreign central banks, instead of having to sell their treasuries to keep the peg, they can just grab the US dollars and use them basically as a way to keep their peg. And that way they don't have to sell the treasuries, which then the Fed would have to redeem, and they'd have to print even more money in order to make up for that contraction. Let's see. I read Nick Szabo shelling out. Fiat money is a bigger joke than anything I've seen so far today. Sadly, many want to believe that you can get something for nothing, prosperity through money printing, and they'd rather put their hope in something impossible than fixing this mess. Start fixing off for Bitcoin. And this is the big thing about any sort of stimulus, is that you're really just redistributing money. You're trying to get something for nothing, and that doesn't work. It never works. You have to start fixing the actual underlying problem, and Bitcoin is the first step. And that was the point of the tweet. Hospital administrators making ridiculous rules. Every industry has seen an explosion of admins since 1971. Fiat money encourages rent-seeking behavior. Fiat and nanny-state go hand in hand for that reason. So I was subtweeting the fact that hospital administrators are saying, like, you can't wear nurses can't bring in masks from their home and wear them at work because it might panic people, or they're not the doctors or nurses are not allowed to talk about the lack of masks at their hospital. Now, this is because of administrators, and you look at almost every industry, education, healthcare, stuff like that. Anything that's like kind of grown exponentially, it's not grown in doctors or professors or teachers or anything like that. It's always grown in administrators. Administrators are kind of natural rent seekers. They make kind of ridiculous rules for that reason. So. That's that we're kind of having to the chickens of administrative stuff are coming home to roost. Toilet paper is now in a boom part of the business cycle. This means there will be a bust part of the business cycle in toilet paper eventually. Imagine if 12 months from now there's too much toilet paper on the shelves and the Fed started to buy them. That's QE in a nutshell. That's basically what the Fed is doing with mortgage-backed securities. They're buying them at the cost that the banks paid for them. They're bailing them out and letting them off the hook because this is they can kind of do that. And what does that do? That just encourages them to make riskier and riskier loans, which is essentially what most of these guys do. Why aren't there more masks in stores? Because health authorities aren't concerned with public health as much as they are at covering up for their friends. Realize this is true of every government authority opt out with Bitcoin. So what I'm talking about here is the fact that there's something called KN95 masks that they think may be as good as N95, but basically they're being held at the border because the FDA hasn't approved them and so on. So there is all sorts of stuff like that. They're trying to cover their own butts in case the hospitals get sued or something like that. And that's what's true of most of these administrators. They are not doing all of this as a way to they're not doing all of this as a way, they don't have your best interests at heart. They have their friends' best interests at heart. Imagine if you hoarded a lot of toilet paper today at high prices. Imagine that you don't have any need for them 12 months from now. Then the Fed gives you a loan against the toilet paper based on what you pay for it. That's the Fed's liquidity facility in a nutshell. And they have a lot of different liquidity facilities at this moment. So basically, they'll lend out money against bonds, against different types of derivatives, even for foreign central banks and so on. But that's how they keep everything liquid. That's how they keep people from selling and crashing the price of things, which is what actually needs to happen in a bust side of the cycle. Are there any good resources for forming online study groups? There are two problems they should solve: finding other people interested in the same topic at about the same level of skill, coordinating times to discuss synchronously, and software to discuss asynchronously. No one really responded to this, but this is something that I'm very interested in as I start. I've been studying a lot of number theory, elliptic curves, cryptography, and applied cryptography. Some other stuff. I'm also studying Miniscript on my own and, Austrian economics. But I would love study groups for that sort of thing because that helps me sort of solidify my learning. Any system is only as strong as its weakest link. Security requires strengthening vulnerable systems. Health requires good maintenance. Finances require risk management to unforeseen events. Life anti-fragility requires dealing with character flaws. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is that if you want to survive anything in particular, you need to survive, you don't know what the event will be. So like any sort of character flaw that you have in a situation like this will tend to get magnified and exposed, which is why it's very important to work on your character flaws. It's kind of like security. You want to shore up sort of weak links. Or health, you want to shore up any sort of weaknesses that you might have and so on. The most deadly disease killing otherwise healthy people is authoritarianism. Give up your own freedom at your own peril. And this is just the Authoritarianism has killed more people than anything else, and you only need to look at communist Russia or communist China or um, all sorts of events in history where you had people that were forcing other people to do other things that they didn't want to, and that causes more people to be killed than anything else. All right. Any good resources to hire tutors for certain subjects willing to pay for math CS profs for 1.5 to 1 hour a week to answer some questions I have about the material I'm studying? I basically want to accelerate my learning by having someone explain to me stuff that I don't understand in some of the books. I've been using like Stack Exchange and stuff like that, but some of it just no one has real answers to. How do you spend your time? How you spend your time now is a good indicator of what you're addicted to, how disciplined you are, and what you truly value. In that order, having addictions will hide 2 and 3. Lack of discipline will hide 3. And that's what I found is that you have to sort of remove your addictions first, and then you have to increase your discipline. Then you can work on what you truly value. Otherwise, it like the addictions and lack of discipline sort of create your values for you. How much longer could you survive the lockdown without going broke? Looks like a lot of people are in trouble. About 25% are already broke or have about a month left. Most people seem to, the majority seem to be okay, but that's a lot of people given 3,280 votes. There's an asymmetry in predictions. Bad predictions are mostly forgotten. The one who made the prediction has little incentive to remember, and most aren't paying attention. Good predictions are usually remembered. The one who made the prediction brags about it. And this is the thing about making predictions. Lots of people like to make predictions because they have this asymmetry. They can just forget about the bad predictions that they made and crow about the good predictions and make them seem smarter than they are. This is pretty much how every pundit works. They make like 30 predictions, and the 1 or 2 that they were correct about, they'll just crow about. There is an interesting tweet that Adam made, which is that except Bitcoiners, not nearly toxic enough. Big blockers with dozen ridiculously bad calls in a row are on every single topic, economic, comp sci, game theory, still acting like nothing happened. It's an empirical Dunning-Kruger situation. Bitcoiners too polite to say told you so. And that's absolutely true. There's a lot of people that act like that have made bad predictions and so on. And the people that are in Bitcoin that have been in it for a long time, they have a track record of going down the right path, that they've made the right choices and that they've made the right predictions because their money depends on it. And in a sense, that's what this whole thing is showing. And his point is that, well, your money and where you are kind of indicate how long you've been in this space and how anti-fragile you are. Even someone like Trace Mayer can go astray with Wimble coin. So that tells you, what's that's not a bad indicator of good or bad predictions. It's more market based. All right, so that's about it for my tweets. Let's do our long read of LSAT, authentication and payments for the Lightning native web. Today, we're excited to announce the release of our draft of a specification for Lightning Service Authenticated Tokens, LSAT. LSAT is a new protocol standard for authentication and paid APIs using the Internet's preferred currency, SATs. Developed by Lightning Labs, which leverages the widely underused HTTP 402 payment required status code, LSATs can serve both as authentication as well as a payment mechanism. One can view it as a ticket of sorts for paid APIs. By leveraging LSATs, a service or business is able to offer a new tier of paid APIs that sits between the free and subscription, metered with no login, email, or passwords required. So, two things here. So, the part that I was emphasizing is the actual payment in a microtransaction form. The other thing that it lets you do is you can have authentication. You don't need an email, password, billing address, all this other personal info. You can just use your Lightning node. That's your authentication right there, and that's enough. Alongside this specification, we're also releasing Aperture, our implementation of an HTTP 402 payment required LSAT reverse proxy, which is used in production today by Lightning Loop. Aperture can be used to easily create a new LSAT-aware paid API or service, and even seamlessly upgrade an existing web resource or API to make it LSAT-enabled, creating a portal from the existing web to the new Lightning native web. So essentially what Aperture sounds like is it's kind of like a BTC Pay, but instead of like e-commerce merchant transactions, it's for API calls. So you can add sort of like the equivalent of a BTC Pay to a bunch of API calls that you might have. If you're an email service provider, like being able to send an email without it getting caught in spam is a useful thing. So you might be able to send on a per email basis based on the API call or something like that. So really interesting, thing with Aperture. One can view LSATs as a fancy authentication token or cookie. They differ from regular cookies in that they're a cryptographically verifiable bearer credential. An LSAT token encodes all its capabilities within a macaroon, which can only be created by the end service provider. The LSAT specification uses a combination of HTTP as well as the Lightning Network to create a seamless end-to-end payment authentication flow for the next generation of paid APIs built on top of the Lightning Network. So it's kind of funny because macaroons were kind of made, the name macaroon came out of the name cookie. So it's it's kind of funny that it's encoding it's encoding a macaroon sort of in kind of like a cookie. So basically you can view LSATs as an authentication token. It tells you where it's from and that no one can really copy that. And it has some money locked to it, and it's on the Lightning Network. So you can, if you have like watchtowers or, trampoline routing or something like that, you can know who's doing what. In the remainder of this blog post, we'll explore the motivation, lineage, and workflow of LSATs at a high level. We'll also examine Aperture to see how it's used today in production by Lightning Loop and explore some of its initial features. For readers that are interested in more details, we encourage developers and other interested parties to check out the full LSAT draft specification. The spec itself is open source, and we're actively accepting contributions. All right, LSAT, the forgotten HTTP error code. HTTP, as we know it today, uses a number of error codes to allow developers to easily consume APIs or resources created by users on the web. As an example, the well-known 200OK error code indicates a successful HTTP response. The 404 now found is sent when a client attempts to access a page or resource that couldn't be found by the server. A large number of other error codes exist, with some more commonly used than others, like there's a bunch of 500 level errors and 300 level redirects and so on. One error code which has widely been underutilized is 402 payment required. As the name entails, this code is returned when a client attempts to access a resource they haven't paid for yet. In most versions of the HTTP specification, this code is marked as being reserved for future use. Many speculate that it was intended to be used by some sort of digital cash or micropayment scheme, which didn't exist yet at the time of the initial HTTP specification drafting. This was in the 90s or maybe even late 80s. So yeah, of course, nothing really existed back then for that sort of thing. I don't think encryption beyond 40 bits was even allowed back then. However, several decades later, we do have a widely used digital cash system, Bitcoin. On top of that, a new network oriented around micropayments has also risen, the Lightning Network. Early in the lifetime of Lightning Labs, we were drawn to the potential for paid metered APIs enabled by the Lightning Network. We'd solved the payment portion of the Lightning Network itself. The next challenge was to create a protocol that would be easy to drop into existing APIs in an easy and extensible manner. Our solution to this is the LSAT protocol. So it's basically a way to do 402 payment required. Authentication and API payments in a Lightning native web. Lightning has the potential to serve as the de facto payment method to access services and resources on the web. In this new web, rather than a user being tracked across the web with invisible pixels to serve invasive ads, or users needing to give away their emails, subjecting themselves to a lifetime of spam and tracking, what if a user were able to pay for a service and in the process obtain a ticket receipt, which can be used for future authentication and access? In this new web, email addresses and passwords are a thing of the past. Instead, cryptographic bearer credentials are purchased and presented by users to access services and resources. In this new web, credit cards no longer serve as a gatekeeper to all the amazing experiences that have been created on the web. LSATs enable the creation of a new, global, more private, more developer-friendly web. And this is a major thing. You don't need an email address. You don't need a password. You just need a payment. And all of the sort of stuff around payment, which is registration, billing address, all this other stuff, has been created so that the payment is assured to go through. By using Lightning, well, you're already assured because it's a bearer instrument and it's trustless. So that makes it a lot better for anyone developing anything with API payments. HTTP plus macaroons plus Lightning equals LSAT. And LSAT is essentially a ticket obtained over Lightning for a particular service or resource. The ticket itself encodes what resource it's able to access and potentially much more. It can be copied or given to a friend so they can access the same resource. It can also be attenuated to provide a friend access to a slightly weaker version of that resource, able to stream video at only 480p as an example. On the other hand, services can mint special tickets for particular users, rotate, upgrade, and even revoke the tickets. The tickets themselves are actually macaroons. Macaroons are a flexible standard for API credentials, which are already used by LND as its default authentication mechanism. The LSAT protocol allows a user to atomically purchase one of these tickets for sats over the Lightning Network. Partial LSATs are served over HTTP when a user attempts to access a resource that requires payment, along with a Lightning invoice. This partial LSAT can then be converted into a complete LSAT by paying the invoice and obtaining the payment pre-image. The invoice says to a payment hash equals SHA-256 of the pre-image. So essentially, you get these tickets and you can use them for whatever you want. You can imagine, for example, like buying a movie from Google or something like that, and you get a ticket. Now Google will stream that movie to you, so you can watch it at home. And you can do it on like a per minute basis, right? Like a penny per minute. And if you watch the whole 2-hour movie, then it's like $1.20. But if you don't watch the whole movie, you can just stop whenever you want. And that's a much better model because basically you're paying exactly how much you're going to get, how much of it that you watched. With proper integration at end clients, Lightning wallets, mobile applications, browsers, and the above flow has potential to be even more seamless than the credit card flow users are accustomed today. It's also more private, as the server doesn't need to know who paid for the ticket, only that it was successfully paid for. And this is another thing. They don't keep track of whatever. You can just pay for it and watch the movie without Google knowing that it was you that bought it and that this is, which leverages Joule to create a seamless experience for users seeking to obtain information about the best nodes on the Lightning Network. So this is, all right, so that's demo. Example applications and use cases. The LSAT standard enables a number of new use cases, pricing models, and applications to be built, all using the Lightning Network as a primary money rail. As the standard is also defined over HTTP2, it can be naturally extended to also support gating access to existing gRPC services. This is rather powerful as it enables strong decoupling of authentication and payment logic from application logic. Today, Lightning Loop uses LSAT in this very manner to provide a lightweight authentication mechanism for our users. So authentication and payment, those tend to be very, very strongly linked. But by issuing tickets for the payment, you don't need to have sort of like authentication tied strictly to that. You could give that ticket to somebody else. They can use it to get whatever gated service and so on. As LSATs leverage the Lightning Network for its payment capabilities, they also enable the easy creation of metered APIs. A metered API is one where the user is able to pay for the target resource or service as they go, rather than needing to commit to a subscription up front. Developers can use LSATs to create applications that charge users on an ongoing basis for resources like compute, file hosting, or just raw disk space. If the user stops paying, then the resource can be suspended, collected, and reallocated for another paying user. Once again, as the standard supports gRPC, which supports bidirectional streaming APIs, one could even create a metered streaming video or audio service as well. Additionally, LSATs also enable innovation at the API architecture level. One example is automated tier upgrades. Many APIs typically offer several tiers, which allow users to gain access to more or additional resources as they climb up the ladder. Typically, a user must manually navigate a web page to request an upgrade to a higher tier or downgrade to a lower tier. With the LSAT standard, tier upgrades can easily be automated. The user hits a new endpoint to obtain an upgraded LSAT, which encodes additional functionality or increased resource access compared to the prior tier. Services can even leverage LSATs for A/B testing by giving subsets of users distinct LSATs, which, when submitted to the service, render a slightly different version of the target resource or service. So basically, LSATs allow you to do something very different. So you can charge more for a slightly different service and things like that. It allows a lot more flexibility for the person that's building the service instead of having, sort of very crude levels of service. You can have much more finer levels of service because it's based on what the user wants and not what's convenient for you to set up. Aperture, your portal to the Lightning native web. Excited to give the LSAT protocol a spin and develop the next generation of Lightning native web services? Well, you're in luck, as we're also releasing the code for Aperture, our implementation of an LSAT-aware reverse proxy, which is used in our production systems today. Aperture sits between an API server or web resource and the web itself, seamlessly handling the authentication protocol, macaroon minting, and verification, along with the payment verification. Using a simple YAML-based config, developers can easily create or upgrade an existing web service to be LSAT aware. This initial release of Aperture supports minting for targeted services, LSATs that restrict the path resources a user can access, expiring LSATs access to resources for just 1 day as an example, proxying REST and gRPC calls, and even natively supports exposing services over Tor. The default storage backend for Aperture is etcd, reliable distributed key store value, which is used as a backbone for many projects such as Kubernetes. We plan to continue developing Aperture over the coming months, add more features, and generalize its deployment in order to make it more widely usable. We've also populated the issue tracker with some low-hanging fruit and some longer-term goals for aspiring contributors to dive into. So basically what you can do is you have a reverse proxy. It's basically that's something that sits in front of your API service, and it does all of the payment collection and everything for you, and is sort of like the glue that will take care of the payments aspect in front of whatever API service that you have. And that's very useful. That's very interesting. And it's sort of like a plug and play thing that makes it makes sort of making money off of your API very easy. Conclusion. In this post, we've introduced LSAT, a new standard for authentication and paid APIs for the web. LSATs use the Lightning Network for payments and a combination of HTTP 402 and macaroons for authentication and forgery resistance. The LSAT protocol gives us a glimpse into the Lightning native web that is more global, private, and extensible. We encourage the community to review our recently published specification and also give Aperture a spin as well. We look forward to all the amazing things developers will build with this new standard and our supporting tooling. So basically, this is really, really a way to sort of decentralize a lot of things. So instead of having one provider that has to take care of everything, you can now go piecemeal and get different things from different players and keep your privacy at the same time. You don't have to register your username and password with everybody. A lot of these things, like a lot of the friction around like setting up a service is actually the payment aspect, and Lightning makes that easy. So they're trying to sort of add the convenience of that into these services. And I think this is the right model. This is the way in which Lightning will develop, is by providers realizing, oh, okay, well, now I can do this. Now, it's going to be some time before there's enough capacity and enough demand on this, but the technology needs to be built now so that we can test it and scale it and so on. All right, so that's about it for today. Let's see if there are any questions. What's the LN auth and LSAT? Well, L and auth is just authentication. LSAT's also like for payment. Do you think Ver will ever come to his senses, or is he too far gone at this point? I mean, only he knows. But I mean, I'm guessing that. Let's see. Yeah, that's about it. All right. Well, that it sounds like that hopefully that helped you. It's always fun to like sort of read through these things. Uh, this has been educational for me, and I do enjoy doing it. Fiat delenda est. This song is done.